There's a lot of talk about church hurt today, but the way most pastors respond to church hurt actually just makes it worse. And I'm not talking a little worse. I'm talking way worse. It's more damaging than if they hadn't talked about it at all. And that's exactly what we're going to look at in today's video. We're going to react to a sermon by Mat Chandler, a clip that was sent to me, where he talks about church hurt in a way that I think is dismissive, dangerous, or at best, just immature. It's unwise. Now, before I get a bunch of people flooding my comments and my mentions taken up for Mat Chandler, I'm not against Mat Chandler. He's had some incredible sermons. From what I can see, for the most part, he's been an incredible leader and someone who really stands up for people. But his take on church hurt is like so many other pastors, and it's dangerous, it's dismissive, it's not helpful, and it's not reality. So let's go ahead. Let's take a look. I think you guys are going to see what I mean. We'll start this and we'll just kind of stop and watch through it. But I want you to listen to his tone from the very beginning.
I want to acknowledge church hurt and betrayal is a real thing, but that...
All right, so let's stop right there. I want to acknowledge that church hurt and betrayal is a real thing. Props to you, Mat Chandler, for acknowledging that church hurt is real, because a lot of pastors don't even go that far, okay? They talk about church hurt as something that everybody should just get over, or it's not a real thing, or it's just a fad, or it's just a trend. It's a way for people to complain. So I love the fact that you started with, I want to acknowledge that church hurt is a real thing. The last word we heard there, though, is huge. But. Anytime we use the word but like that, we are negating everything we've already talked about. So what Mat Chandler is really saying here, psychologically, this is how people are going to hear it. Okay, I didn't come up with the English language. I didn't come up with human psychology. Don't blame me. Okay, this is just the truth. When he says this, he is saying, I acknowledge that church hurt is a real thing, but... and everything he says after that is the main thing he's talking about. Everything he said before that doesn't really matter, which means church hurt isn't really a big thing. I acknowledge it's a real thing, but it doesn't happen to most people. That's kind of the connotation that we're given. By the way, this music is intense. From the clip that was sent to me, and I know there are other clips out there, but this music is it's intense. It's a little angry. So let's go ahead. We'll start this back again. Listen to what Mat Chandler has to say about church hurt.
I want to acknowledge church hurt and betrayal is a real thing, but that is the most self-righteous pronouncement I think a person can say. Are you?
Oh my goodness. You see his face, right? Part of the problem when we talk about church hurt is when pastors get so angry about something, they're letting everybody who's listening to them, whether that's live in the sermon or people online, when they get angry about something, they're letting people know that they think you are wrong for saying this, for doing this. And Mat Chandler went from 0 to a 100, super angry in no time. I recognize that church hurt and betrayal is a real thing, but that's one of the most blah, 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 very, very angry. You hear me? Right? Like that's what he's talking about. He gets really angry and he uses words like self-righteous, right? So he goes through, he uses all this, and now we know that Mat Chandler is very frustrated with us. He's frustrated with people who have been through church hurt or see church hurt this way. He's angry about church hurt. And he's not angry because people have been mistreated. He's not angry because people have been abused. He's angry because he thinks people who have been church hurt have done something wrong. And he's going to explain why. I get where he's coming from. But pastors, we got to do better, okay? Nobody needs more angry pastors, okay? We need more empathetic pastors. Nobody needs more angry pastors. We need more protective pastors, okay? We don't need more angry preachers. We need better leaders, okay? So drop the angry preacher act, okay? Because when we talk about things like this and we get angry every time, all it's doing is it's causing people to not be honest with us and to not be honest with church leaders about what's going on. So back to the video.
Church hurt and betrayal is a real thing, but that is the most self-righteous pronouncement I think a person can say. Are you serious? The disciples don't bail on Jesus.
Are you serious? Are you serious?
Because of Judas. They got their eyes on Jesus.
The disciples don't bail. Are you serious? The disciples don't bail on Jesus because of Judas. Most of the people that I know who have been spiritually abused or church hurt, they didn't bail on Jesus anyway. They bailed on a certain church or certain expressions of the church. The ones that did bail on the faith, it wasn't because of one Judas. It wasn't because of one person, Okay, so what we're doing is we're basically saying that what Mat Chandler's basically kind of implying here is that most people who go through church hurt, they have had something small happen to them, and because one person mistreated them, they're Judas, that they bailed on Jesus. Well, of course the disciples didn't do that. But what about the early Christians who weren't the disciples, but came to faith through the disciples? If almost every interaction they had with one of the 11 disciples or with Paul later on was spiritually abusive, they would have probably bailed on faith. They would have probably said, hey, if these are abusive people, if these people don't actually live what they're preaching, okay, then I don't want any part of it, right? And that's the thing. It's usually not a single Judas that causes someone to bail on a church. And again, most of the time they don't bail on Jesus, but it's not one person who mistreated them. A lot of times it's a pattern of behavior. And worst, most people step away when they realize that pattern of behavior is never going to be addressed and it's been covered up, potentially multiple times. But when we just get angry, like what Mat Chandler's doing here right now, when you just get angry and go into angry preacher mode, you don't show any empathy. So now we're kind of lumping, hey, I recognize the church hurt and betrayal is a real thing, but most church hurt is a bunch of people bailing on Jesus because of Judas, bailing on the faith because of one person's actions they don't like. And I just don't think that's true at all. That's not been my experience at all, but it keeps Matt and it keeps other pastors like this from being empathetic enough to listen to people with real stories of spiritual abuse. And most of them are still not talking because of rhetoric like this.
Blown away by Jesus. They're not looking around going, oh man, all these people were following him, and man, look at that, they're inconsistent. You're inconsistent. I'm inconsistent.
And again, he goes right into inconsistency is the issue. The original disciples, they didn't leave Jesus because of Judas. They were blown away by what God said. You know, they didn't leave because someone was inconsistent. I've never met someone who left a church or left the Christian faith because a Christian they knew were inconsistent. Okay, when we're talking about inconsistencies, I've seen people leave because the response to abuse was inconsistent or didn't exist. I've actually seen people leave the faith most or leave churches specifically most when they say this behavior, this abusive behavior is quite consistent. It consistently doesn't look like Jesus. It consistently doesn't look like what you preach. It consistently hurts people and it's consistently covered up. So I would just say, Matt, inconsistency is not the issue, but all of a sudden you get angry preacher mode and you are railing on inconsistency and you're railing on this small sliver of people who are church hurt and spiritually abused. And now anyone who's not been through that is sitting in the congregation going, yeah, those soft people, those people who are church hurt, they're just soft. They need to get over it and really follow Jesus. And if they left the church, they were never with us to begin with. Do you see how dangerous that rhetoric is? At this point in the clip, if you are pro Mat Chandler or you're really believing what he's saying, you're picking up what he's putting down, you're angry too, and you have zero empathy at this point. And that's the problem. Most churches and pastors today, we don't have enough empathy. We've lost the art of empathy. We've lost the art of listening. When James said, all right, we should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Okay? I can tell you from the way he's reacting, Mat Chandler has not been very quick to listen to people with heavy spiritual abuse stories. Otherwise, he'd have a little bit more empathy. He'd at least be talking about these a little bit more, okay? Instead, he's quick to speak on church hurt, and he's very quick, even in this clip, to become angry, which lets me know that this is probably not the same take that Jesus would have. But we'll continue.
This is the only community there is that celebrates the fact that we're all in process.
Now, I'll agree with that. One of the things that is most powerful about the church is that we're all in process. We don't have to be perfect, right? We can celebrate the fact that we are all growing at different paces. Now, part of that, though, because we're not perfect and we're not all immature, we do have to protect parishioners against spiritual abuse, okay? So instead of getting upset, I agree with you, Mat Chandler, but instead of getting so upset about church hurt, maybe we should listen a little bit more to the things that people are saying. Because I think what he's really honing in on is a very small minority of church hurt people who are over here, who are using that as an excuse to leave a faith that they'd probably already decided to leave. But the majority of church hurt experiences that I've heard, and especially the majority of spiritual abuse stories I've heard, they're so much deeper than this. And we have to get past that anger, and we have to actually listen to know what's going on.
To demand that you get grace and nobody else is self-righteousness.
I would agree with that too. To demand that nobody else gets grace except for you, that is self-righteousness. Who's doing that though? Like, there's not an example we're using where we're really talking about that. That's not what I hear most people who go through church hurt and spiritual abuse do. So, man, we're kind of getting the mob with the pitchforks and the torches, mad at a whole group of people about church hurt, which is, again, it's a minority. This is not what most people's experiences are. These aren't the stories that I'm hearing.
And to punt on Jesus because some Christian, isn't up to your standards is a dangerous place to stand before a living God.
To punt on Jesus because someone else didn't live up to your standards is a dangerous place to stand before a living God. Now, I would agree with that. But again, most people who I've seen, quote unquote, punt on Jesus, or more often punt on the church, they're not doing that because one person was inconsistent. They're not doing that because one person hurt them, right? And I would say this. Here's the big danger there. I don't disagree with everything that Mat Chandler is saying, but I would say the bigger danger than someone punting on Jesus because someone, was inconsistent. Okay, when people are trying to figure out what they believe about Jesus, anything can kind of cause them to go this way or that way. I think it's more dangerous for preachers and church leaders, those of us that are held to a higher standard, to demean and dismiss and get angry at people who say they've experienced church hurt, or to demean, dismiss, and get angry at people and vilify people who have a hard time coming back to church or who have left your church because they've been church hurt or spiritually abused. If we do that before we listen, that is a dangerous place to stand before a living God. Okay? Because God gave you sheep, Pastor. He gave you those sheep to protect. He gave you those sheep to care for. We've got to listen. We've got to understand. We've got to care for those who say, I've been church hurt and spiritually abused. Jesus left the 99 to go after the one. Sometimes the one is the one who is leaving the church expression because they've been mistreated, because something that happened. And I'm not saying it's the right decision, but we should be going after them instead of yelling at them and making them feel bad. When pastors talk about church hurt and spiritual abuse in ways like this, we only make it worse. And I'm just going to tell you, you can tell a lot about a pastor by the way they talk about church hurt and spiritual abuse. And I have the utmost respect for pastors that show empathy when they talk about church hurt and spiritual abuse. They may come to a lot of the same conclusions that Mat Chandler did. But when you simply show empathy and understanding that this is bigger than what he's talking about here, understanding that people have went through very severe abuse issues, okay? When we show that empathy, it goes a long way. Now, I'm not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I still think, again, a lot of Mat Chandler's ministry has been incredible. I love the way that he handled some things that happened, in the past year, that he was able to receive correction. So overall, seems like a good pastor, but this response is just like so many others. It's dangerous. If you want to hear about another response that's similar by another famous pastor, you can check out this video here to hear John Bevere's response to church hurt. But these things, these responses, they happen too often, okay? And they're not pointing people back to Jesus. They're not bringing people back to the church. They're simply turning them away. And pastors, our response to people who have been church hurt or say they have been spiritually abused should never push them farther away from Jesus. Let's be quick to listen. Let's be slow to speak and slow to become angry.